The soft sound of the jewelry store door echoed as the millionaire entered, the room bathed in a warm light that reflected off the polished display cases. He was there out of obligation, another formality in his meticulously planned life. Buying an expensive gift for a special occasion, as he always did. His gaze wandered over the sparkling jewelry, each piece more expensive than the last, but none of it stirred any emotion in him. The displays in front of him showcased brilliant pieces, but his interest was minimal. He moved through the store apathetically, as if the luxury around him was just another task to check off his endless list of commitments. However, a particular shimmer caught his eye. His gaze settled on a small, discreet pendant, almost carelessly hanging in the case. His heart seemed to stop for a second. That pendant. He recognized that design. The same symbol engraved on the delicate piece, the same fine gold chain. His mind immediately took him back years to when he had bought it for his daughter. A special gift, something that symbolized their bond. And then she disappeared, leaving behind a void he was never able to fill. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the display, staring at the pendant as if he were seeing a ghost. He looked around the store, searching for answers that no one there could provide. How could that jewelry, which had disappeared along with his daughter, be right there in front of him? The millionaire took the pendant in his trembling hands as if that small gold object could answer all the questions that had haunted him for years. He turned sharply to the jeweler, his voice firm but tense. "Where did you get this?" The jeweler, a middle-aged man, looked confused for a moment but quickly shifted into a more professional demeanor. He adjusted his glasses and glanced at the computer, searching for information about the piece's origin. This jewelry was acquired from a customer. He hesitated, noticing the millionaire's anxiety. "Anonymous, sir. The piece was sold to us a few months ago, but the customer didn't leave many details. Just a fictitious name used for the transaction." The millionaire felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The anonymity only deepened the mystery. How could the pendant, which he had bought for his daughter, end up there, in the hands of a stranger? His mind swirled with questions he couldn't answer. Who sold it? And why? The jeweler tried to ease the tension. "I can provide the details we have about the transaction, but as I mentioned, the client wasn't very specific." That wasn't enough. The millionaire knew he needed more. He couldn't let this chance slip away. He had already lost his daughter. He wouldn't lose this opportunity to uncover the truth. "I want everything you have," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "And I'm going to hire someone to investigate this." With that thought, the carefully controlled and organized life he cherished began to crack. The order and control he valued were on the verge of collapse, replaced by a growing need for answers. The investigator's office was as simple as it was functional, with worn-out furniture and windows that barely let in daylight. The millionaire sat in an uncomfortable chair, feeling out of place in this world so far removed from his life of luxury. Beside him was the man now in charge of the investigation, Dario Albuquerque, a private investigator with decades of experience, sharp eyes, and a skeptical stance. Dario studied the documents the millionaire had brought, absorbing every detail in silence. After a long sigh, he looked up, observing the man in front of him. "Look, I've seen cases like this before," Dario said, his voice deep and blunt. "People disappear, and sometimes the truth is hard to accept." The millionaire shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. Those words touched an open wound, but he refused to waver. "I'm not here for speculation," he replied, barely maintaining his firmness. "I need facts. This pendant is all I have. It belonged to my daughter. She disappeared years ago, and now suddenly this shows up in a jewelry store. I need you to find out how it got there." Dario, though skeptical, recognized the seriousness in the millionaire's eyes. This wasn't a typical case of someone seeking closure for their pain. There was more at stake. He gave a firm nod. "All right, I'll need some time, but I'll get started right away." He paused, flipping through the papers once more. "We'll begin with the jewelry store. Then we'll track every point of contact for this piece as far as we can." The millionaire nodded, but the feeling of losing control gnawed at him from within. He had always been a man who commanded his own life. Now, He was handing over the key to his greatest mystery to a stranger. Even so, hope, small but persistent, kept him sitting there, unwilling to turn back. "Do whatever it takes," he said, almost in a whisper. The investigation had barely begun, and obstacles were already emerging. Dario returned to the jewelry store to gather more details, but the reception he received was less than encouraging. The manager, though cooperative, seemed to have little control over what happened with the pieces bought and sold. "We buy from many suppliers, sir, and honestly, not all of them leave the kind of detailed records we'd like," the manager said, pulling out some old, disorganized papers from a file. Dario sifted through the records. The pages were filled with rushed notes, bulk purchases, and vague descriptions of the jewelry. The name of the customer who brought in the pendant? Anonymous. Nothing that led to a breakthrough. Dario frowned, his eyes dark and irritated. The millionaire, closely following every step of the process, felt the frustration building. "This just complicates things," Dario muttered as he left the jewelry store, walking alongside the millionaire. That pendant could have passed through several hands before it got here, maybe even second-hand markets. The millionaire walked in silence, his mind a whirlwind of questions. Why now? Why this pendant after so many years? He tried to push aside the frustration, but the lack of answers was beginning to wear on his patience. "Do you think we're on the right track?" he asked, trying to mask the insecurity that was creeping in. Dario paused for a moment, glancing at the man beside him. "I don't know, but it's never easy at the start. Let's keep going." The days that followed were tense. The millionaire waited anxiously for any updates while Dario scoured for clues. Then, finally, a call came. The investigator's voice, always serious, now carried a tension the millionaire wasn't used to hearing. "I've got a solid lead. The pendant was sold by a woman in a small town a few hundred kilometers away," Dario said. "And who is this woman?" the millionaire asked, holding his breath. "The description matches your daughter." The millionaire's heart nearly stopped. The possibility that his daughter might still be alive, that she herself had touched the pendant that once meant so much to both of them, was overwhelming. For a moment, the room around him seemed to spin. He gripped the edge of the table, trying to stay calm, but his mind was already racing. Memories flooded back. Her laughter, the moments they shared the last day he saw her. "Are you sure?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It's a strong lead, but we need more information before we can confirm anything. I'll head there myself," Dario assured him. Hope surged within him, but it was accompanied by paralyzing fear. What if it was a mistake? What if he was about to relive the devastating pain of loss? But deep down, he knew he had no choice. He had to follow this trail to the end. "Go. Find out everything you can," the millionaire said, his voice now firm, determined to face whatever truth lay ahead. What had once seemed like a directionless search now had focus. He was more determined than ever. The millionaire, accustomed to the comfort of his luxurious routine, found himself out of his element as he embarked on the journey. The town he was headed to was small, unassuming, and everything about it was in stark contrast to the world he lived in. The narrow streets, the simple facades of the houses, and the slow pace of life made him feel like a stranger in an unfamiliar land. The journey was more than just a trip. Every kilometer traveled seemed to increase the pressure in his chest, as if the weight of all the questions he had avoided for years was finally crashing down on him. Was he ready for the answers he might find? Anxiety throbbed with each beat of his heart. When he arrived in the town, he was met with a stifling heat and a faint mist that made the air heavy. The atmosphere felt strange, almost oppressive. He wandered through the streets with uncertain steps, feeling the discomfort of being watched by the locals. Curious and sometimes distrustful, eyes followed his movements. A man who had always controlled everything around him now found himself in a place where nothing belonged to him. The investigation was becoming more personal and painful than he had ever imagined. The possibility of uncovering a truth that would leave a lasting mark on him was growing more real with every step. Each new difficulty, every street he walked down in that small town, brought him closer to an uncertain destiny. Yet the millionaire couldn't turn back. He was determined to follow this journey to the end, no matter what awaited him. His heart raced as he approached the small house at the end of the street. The address provided by the investigator was simple, almost insignificant, but inside was something he had been searching for years. The weight of his expectations and hopes made each step feel heavier. He was preparing for a reunion that, in his mind, had always been filled with embraces and tears of relief. He knocked on the door. For a few moments, the silence was overwhelming. Then, the door slowly opened, revealing a woman with tired eyes and an expressionless face. She was familiar, yet different from what he remembered. The features were there, the eyes, the hair, but the lightness he used to see in his daughter, the girl who smiled as she ran through the garden, was gone. In her place stood a woman marked by something he couldn't fully understand. "You are my daughter?" The words came out more like a whisper than a question. He expected a clear, straightforward answer, but she looked at him with unexpected coldness, her eyes emotionless. She didn't deny it, but she didn't confirm it either. The emotional distance between them was palpable, like an abyss he didn't know how to cross. "Why did you disappear? What happened?" The question had been stuck in his throat for years, but when he finally asked it, it came out desperate. She looked away, hesitating. The answer didn't come immediately, and the silence seemed to cut through the air between them. "I'm not the person you remember," she finally said, showing no affection. Her voice carried a hardness he hadn't expected, and the sound of those words pierced the millionaire's heart. She wasn't ready to reveal what life had put her through, not at that moment. The truth was more complex than he had imagined, and the reunion, far from bringing comfort, only raised more questions and reignited new pain. The millionaire felt a dull ache in his chest as he looked at his daughter, hoping for the answers she was finally starting to give. Her words were fragmented, as if each revelation was carefully chosen, measured. "I ran away," she said, her eyes fixed on some distant point, avoiding her father's gaze. "At the time, I thought it was my only way out. I got involved with people who promised to help, but things didn't turn out the way I expected." His heart tightened with each word, but he noticed something beyond the pain, a wall between them, an invisible barrier she refused to tear down. There was more to the story, and he knew it. The truths she shared were painful, yes, but incomplete. She spoke of the struggles to survive, of having to give up who she was just to keep going. He realized that the distance between them wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She was no longer the carefree young woman he once knew. Life had carved deep scars into her, and he barely recognized the woman standing before him. "Why didn't you ever come back?" he asked, his voice heavy with years of accumulated sorrow. She hesitated for a moment, just long enough for him to sense there was something she still wasn't ready to reveal. "I couldn't. Not in the state I was in." The silence that followed was brutal. The millionaire felt that his daughter had returned, but the connection between them seemed irreparably broken. He wanted to press her, to know more, but he realized that pushing might shatter the fragile bond that still remained. In that moment, he had to face a harsh truth. His daughter had changed forever, and he might never know the full story. The millionaire watched his daughter, the weight in his chest growing heavier, suffocating him. The answers he had searched for all these years were right there, but incomplete. Even so, forcing the person he longed to reconnect with felt too risky. He found himself facing a dilemma: to push for the secrets she might never want to reveal, or accept that some mysteries are meant to stay hidden forever. A man who was always in control of every aspect of his life now realized that some things were beyond his reach, even when it came to his own daughter. The fear of losing what he had just regained consumed him. What else lay behind her silence? He sensed that if he pushed too hard, he might drive her away again, this time for good. With a heavy heart, he remembered all the nights he spent wondering where she might be, all the years he dreamed of their reunion. But now, seeing her before him, he realized that this search had changed him. He wasn't the same man anymore, and his daughter was certainly no longer the young woman he remembered so vividly. Perhaps the search for answers wasn't what mattered most. The millionaire took a deep breath, facing his own pain, and reflected on the path ahead. Some answers would never come. He had to decide if the relationship between them, even with the gaps that remained, was something worth fighting for. The millionaire and his daughter sat across from each other, the silence between them thick with years of distance and unspoken hurt. Finally, she began to speak, her voice hesitant at first, but soon gaining strength. She recounted the hardest moments of her life, the reasons she disappeared, the mistakes, the painful choices and the scars she now carried. Her father, listening to every word, felt the weight of everything she had been through, far more than he had ever imagined. He wanted to ask more, but for the first time, he understood that it wasn't the moment to push. Instead, he reached out his hand. It was a simple gesture, but one full of meaning. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting years of pain, but also a faint glimmer of hope. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew that despite all the unanswered questions, they were there, together. It wasn't the reunion he had imagined during all those lonely nights, but it was a start. "We'll rebuild this, one day at a time," he said softly, his voice filled with restrained emotion. And for the first time, he felt that although the past was irreparable, their future could still be written together. She nodded, and in that moment, a fragile thread of reconnection began to form between them. As he returned home, the millionaire felt the weight of the experience settling on his shoulders. The grand mansion that once felt like a refuge now echoed with the loneliness he had always tried to avoid. But something had changed. He had faced his greatest fear, the truth about his daughter and what the past meant. He didn't have all the answers, but acceptance was beginning to take root in his heart, like a resilient plant. As he walked through the familiar hallways, the memories no longer haunted him. Instead, he saw them in a new light. He had learned that despite his wealth and status, there were aspects of life beyond his control. His love for his daughter didn't depend on answers, but on his willingness to embrace both the pain and the hope. Her image, even from afar, was a reminder that she was alive and had fought her own battles. This realization brought him a new kind of inner peace. He knew that their relationship would take time, patience, and understanding, and that, in itself, was a new beginning. As he looked out the window, watching the sun set on the horizon, he smiled. It wasn't the ending he had dreamed of, but it was a meaningful step toward what could come next. Life moved on, and so should his pursuit of a new relationship with his daughter. The millionaire sat in his favorite chair, the soft glow of the setting sun filtering through the curtains, creating a warm and serene atmosphere. He stared into the space before him, but in his mind, images of the conversation with his daughter played back like a film. He had learned that the love he felt for her would never disappear. If anything, it would grow deeper and more complex, like a river that, despite the stones and detours, never stops flowing. He understood that life is a tangled web of paths, some predictable and others that appear unexpectedly, bringing both pain and joy in equal measure. The wounds of the past were still there, but they were no longer a burden dragging him down. Instead, they had become part of his story, a story that now included hope and resilience. The decision to move forward was liberating. He knew he couldn't control every aspect of his life, but he could choose how to respond to it. The reunion with his daughter, though full of gaps and untold truths, had brought a sense of relief to his heart. That connection, though imperfect, was a new beginning, a sign that despite all the adversity, there was still room for love and reconciliation. As he closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel the peace he had finally found, he smiled. The future was still uncertain, but he was ready to embrace whatever came, at peace with what had already passed. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Leave a comment below and let us know what you would do. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.